This summer is the first year that I've taken off my full-time job to pursue teaching environmental education classes at camps, at libraries. So I do a lot of stuff for kids. Programs for adults are very near and dear to my heart because kids are like sponges. They absorb if they are welcomed into the natural world. They're going to grow up, hopefully, embracing those experiences, wanting to care about animals. But we are the people that are making decisions every day in our own yards. So, I can talk to kids at Frick Park and they go home, and if their parents are spraying poisons everywhere, it's kind of, the eco-friendly nature of what we're talking about ends there. And I know we have some conflicts that sometimes, you're kind of between a rock and a hard place, but hopefully after today, you'll have some more solutions that allow you to really enjoy the wildlife in Pennsylvania that not every area is lucky enough to have. But we'll talk about why these animals are so cool, why they belong in our environment, and then the resource guide will help you deal with any kind of tricky situations at home. All right. I should go back for a second. If you're not familiar with the Pennsylvania Master Naturalist Program, it is a really cool program for adults 18 and over. It's kind of a continued education. It is some independent work, meeting in classes for, I think it's a total of maybe like 3-month period, and go on field trips for your training, which is really fun if you're a nature person to go on field trips with other nature adults. But it's a great way to have a very well-rounded crash course in all aspects of the natural world in Pennsylvania. And when you graduate from the program, you go forth into the community, completing volunteer hours every year. And it can be whatever your passion project is. If you love butterflies and you want to revitalize an empty lot in your neighborhood or a community area, the program equips you with help and support. But you work on a project independently. I love educating people, sharing my collection of mammals and talking about mammal studies. So it's kind of how I got to where I am today. Today, what I would really like to see happen is to emphasize building communities through supporting wildlife. And part of that is just us being here. You guys are probably here because you care about wildlife. It probably is nice to meet other people who feel the same way. Have that shared sense of stewardship. It makes you feel good caring for the earth. You're kind of giving back to your own ecosystem. And when we do recognize animals for their interconnected roles, it also gives you, I think, a sense of grounding. Looking at another life from a different perspective, it fosters empathy, which is always a good thing in this world. And when we do have that balance, those self-regulating animals, we need less interference. A really good example of that we'll talk about is in a world that is very altered by humans, we've removed a lot of predator species. Not balanced anymore. We have too many deer. And it's at a point now, a tipping point where the population is so out of control and so sickly that we have to intervene. So it costs taxpayers a lot of money. We have a lot of car accidents with deer. You see a lot of deer that just are not looking good, they're not healthy, and it's unnecessary that they had to be in that state. So if we were in a state where the ecosystem was more balanced, where we appreciated the rules of predators and allowed them to do their thing, we wouldn't have to worry so much about now the mitigation efforts. And also observing wildlife, it improves your mental health. If you enjoy sitting outside with a morning cup of coffee, watching birds, if you just enjoy observing green spaces or taking walks in local parks, it's something that a lot of people really got into during lockdown. Myself, I think that really grew within me then. And it's been kind of a safe place for me in the world. Community also can be, in addition to physically talking to other people who share some of the same interests and beliefs, community can also actually be just acknowledging that you are part of the ecosystem. I don't know if you've ever had a moment where you're out in the woods and you come across, an animal, and it's just you two out there. You have a moment of kind of checking each other out, that shared curiosity. It's everything, the work worries, other things going on in life might fall away for a minute. And it's It's a nice reminder. We have to take care of these places. We are part of that. That is part of our community. And I love seeing the little communities of animals in my neighborhood, seeing the different, babies in the springtime. It's something that's very uplifting to me. I have lots of friends now who both through the Master Naturalist program and just friends that we enjoy talking about wildlife and caring about wildlife. We send each other pictures all the time. And it is a nice little break in my day when I get a surprise text message of, for example, a bald eagle that was not too far from where I live. It's really cool to see those animals hanging on and surviving. It makes me want to care even more about the areas around me. As far as what our goals are for today, I'd like you to be able to leave maybe identifying animals a little more confidently, both in actually being able to name who you're seeing, some of the signs of animals you're most likely to see, but also what roles they play as predator, as prey, as somebody that's cleaning up the environment. And whenever we understand those roles that they play, we can anticipate their behavior. When we can anticipate their behavior, we can prevent some things from growing into conflict before we have to worry about cleaning up a mess. And practicing prevention. When you recognize all those different things I just talked about, you can take preventative measures at your home. Lethal measures can be avoided because those are not long-term solutions. Those are oftentimes removing a single animal from a situation that is going to be drawing another animal in right away. And it's just not something that most people want to do morally. So we're going to look at other solutions and then sharing, just talking. You may not have neighbors who are on the same page with you about some of the ways you interact with green spaces around you, but sharing what you know and sharing why these animals are important. It's always good to be a little cheerleader for animals in a world that can be really, really harsh to them. As far as the wild neighbors we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about animals that you're most likely to encounter and animals that are highly adaptable in our urban spaces. So even animals that, 20 years ago, we were familiar with being active at certain times of the day, it might be a little bit different now because their wild spaces have been shrinking all this time. Resources in our communities have become more widely available to them, whether it's people putting out food or litter that's inadvertently causing them to have new food resources. Either way, we're talking about all these animals over there adapting to new ways of living that we're putting out either purposefully or just through our growing urban jungle. Knowing what is guiding those animals, knowing when they're active, both time of the day and seasonally, like breeding season, when they're having young, those can help us look out for trouble ahead of time. The first animal, the most commonly encountered, would probably be the white-tailed deer. And you might be seeing little fawns now. It is a time of year that I love, but also late spring fills me with immense dread because I worry for all those little ones that are starting to go out into the world. Yeah,
There's one on like,
especially with all the cars here, with all the traffic, it is beneficial to everyone to be aware of the animals around us. The white-tailed deer is our state animal, and they are widespread throughout most of the country. Although there's not an accurate number, they fluctuate for different reasons. It is estimated there are 100 times the amount of deer in the US that there were 100 years ago, which is a mind-boggling number. And that is the result largely of us removing predators from the ecosystem. So now we really are forced into a position of having to use mitigation efforts, whether that's changing hunting laws, things like that that aren't always agreed on by everybody. And they're things that often cost us a lot of money and are a lot of work, and they're not always effective is the kicker at the end of the day after we have to go through all of that. Pennsylvania is a state where we have some of the most deer collisions with cars. People get really hurt. Obviously, deer get really hurt. So it is something that is worth the investment of paying attention to. Sometimes people think the most commonly encountered animals, they know about them. Oh, I know deer, I know squirrels, I know groundhogs. And we've overlooked the opportunities to actually get to know them because you're not in school with a teacher shoving in your face anymore. You don't have to do a book report about the groundhog. And a lot of times, when conflicts arise, that's the first time in a while we've really wondered why that deer was there. When you hear people say that deer came out of nowhere, it may have felt like that. It probably seemed like that, but we're actually going to learn where deer are mostly hanging out at what times of the year. So these are things that will help us in the future, hopefully. The family groups that you're seeing throughout most of the year are going to be the moms and babies. The bucks are either solo or with little bachelor groups. They will interact more around breeding season, which is also known as rut. As far as the time of day that deer are active, they're crepuscular animals. So they're going to be out in low light settings, dusk and dawn. Crepuscular animals come out at those times because they can still take advantage of higher visibility, but they have a little more cover than they would if they're out in broad daylight. Which is why they are also involved in car collisions most of that time. As far as seasonal changes, rut or the breeding season is in the fall. So that's when you're going to see males that are peak testosterone. They're going to be a little more aggressive. They're probably chasing does around or, butting heads. When a deer wants to tell you to give it space, whether it is typically a buck during rut or maybe a doe that has young that she's protecting or hiding somewhere nearby, they stomp their feet, they snort. It's great to know, just like you should know if a dog is growling at you, it is sending you a signal. It's good to know the signals that wild animals can be sending. Give them their space. Fawns are out and about now. They are little spotted guys. They can't keep up with mom, so they're hidden for most of the day simply because they would be wasting a lot of energy trying to keep up with her on her long legs as she's grazing throughout the day. She might only check on it once or twice during the day, which is why you keep hearing PSAs about don't kidnap a fawn. We don't have enough wildlife resources to keep up with the amount of well-intended people who just don't know enough about wildlife and take them and bring them to a new location. And oftentimes once you have removed it from the wild, it has to be raised in captivity, even if it is not sick, it's not injured, it doesn't need human intervention. And unfortunately for deer, there aren't many places that will take them. So your best bet, observe, leave them be, and mom will probably be back if you find any. By September, most of them have already lost their white spots and they're a little more independent. A lot of people ask me about the antler cycle. So starting off, I guess you'd say, with a bald deer, if you will, in winter, you're going to have the male deer, the bucks, shed their antlers because breeding season is over. Spring to summer, right now, you're going to see them growing them back at a very rapid pace. They're covered in velvet, which looks like the fabric. And velvet is actually a blood vessel rich growth that helps the bone in the antlers develop. It is one of the fastest developing bones that science understands in any way. They are going to, into the fall, grow. The velvet will almost dry out. It's like the blood vessels shut off, basically, at the point where the antlers are at full growth. They will be a little bit itchy feeling. The deer will rub them on trees, both to mark their scent and also to get that velvet off and expose the smooth bone underneath. And that is the time where they want to show off for the ladies. They want to kind of square off with other bucks, see who has the bigger antlers. Antler growth is not always dependent on age. People think that the bigger the antlers, the older that deer is. You can tell a deer's age more accurately by the length of its jawbone. So typically once it's a skeleton, but the jawbone continues growing throughout its life. The antler growth will depend on how healthy that deer was, how many nutrients it was getting. So it may have smaller antler growth in a year where there's not a lot of food, it's a little lean. Also, if deer are injured, whenever they're growing the antlers, let's say a deer sprains its left leg, that right antler will end up normally growing very unusually that year. It might be a lot smaller. It might go kind of straight up instead of branching out. But if you see a deer that has a very unusual antler, unless it was actually broken somehow, it typically means there was an injury on the other side of its body. It's kind of a strange fact if you see them out there. And then after rut, after they've used them for their breeding purposes, they will drop their antlers. It doesn't hurt them. It's painless. And the cycle will start again the following year. Something that we don't have a ton of information on now, but I think is information to look out for in the future is as we understand, just kind of scraping the surface of a deer's, the cells in their antlers, some of the fastest growing cells, they switch on and off like a light switch. They also are very resistant to tumor growth. If scientists could understand and unlock the information as to how those cells turn on and turn off year after year, we could potentially use that in cancer studies and apply that science to cancer cells, hopefully being able to switch off tumor growth at some point. Why are deer important? We've discussed them being involved in car collisions and stomping their feet at us, but they do more than that. They are very, very important in shaping forests. When they're grazing, they are actually shaping, they're kind of the architects of the way that our forest grows, because they are trimming back certain low-lying plants, and they will be allowing new trees to grow in forests, assuming that they're not overbrowsing it. They also, as they're eating fruits, berries, they will redeposit the seeds in their scat in other places around the forest. They'll carry seeds on their fur to different locations. So they actually improve the biodiversity of a forest as herbivores. As herbivores that serve as prey species, they are some of the biggest animals that you could find as a meal. We don't have a lot of animals that would actively hunt an adult deer if it's healthy in Pennsylvania, but we do have a ton of scavengers that a dead deer is going to provide a lot of nutrition for. And aside from things that we think of as, facts and numbers, a lot of the stuff that I'll talk about today as to why animals are important in the ecosystem would be things that you might hear presented in arguments for changing laws in the Game Commission, things like that. We'll talk about, stats and numbers, why these animals affect our landscape. But aside from all of that, deer have been important animals in indigenous folklore for many, 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 many times. Many histories revolve around deer, and in North American folklore, deer represent a lot of qualities that they had found admirable and would hope that humans could learn from and possess. And deer were usually represented as kind of the duality of vulnerability and strength, which I think is really beautiful. And if you ever see, a graceful deer and know that it's out there, surviving every day, I think that's a pretty accurate representation of this beautiful animal that's still really tough and hangs on. This year, I work part-time in O'Hara Township, and this guy a couple years ago had been seen, and a lot of people were very concerned about its safety because it had what looks to be some kind of a broken planter stuck around its head. And you can see up here, it does have the beginning buds of antlers. So if that bucket had been stuck in its head much longer, it probably would have been very dangerous for somebody to potentially approach and try to tranquilize, as well as making it harder to get that off its head. Fortunately, there were enough people that kind of publicized this deer. He had been in the local newspaper. So I think the public made it known. They really demanded help for him. And they were able to actually safely get that off his head. That is a rare instance with deer, though. Like I mentioned earlier, our wildlife rescuers specifically are overdrawn with the amount of work that they have to do. And oftentimes a deer, between getting an actual, game warden, somebody like that on the ground, having to tranquilize a deer, it's oftentimes not looked as really worth it. So injured deer don't have a great lot in life. This guy was very lucky, but it also emphasizes how a little bit of care and foresight on our behalf can really be the difference between life or death in an animal. Just something as simple as not picking up litter could have ended this deer's life. Another animal that we commonly see in our shared areas are raccoons. They're opportunistic omnivores, which means they eat about anything. They can digest about anything. Unfortunately, that does extend to when they're getting through things like trash or finding litter on the ground. They can eat things like wrappers that might have food residue or food smells on it. That's not great for them. They can carry rabies. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, animal behavior is changing so rapidly because our cityscapes are changing so rapidly. It is really important to know that you are more likely to see a healthy, totally normal raccoon out during the day than you would in a very rural setting or 20 years ago, because we have a lot of people that are doing things like putting out food to feed them. You know, they see videos on Facebook or YouTube about people interacting with raccoons, and it could be very well intended, but you know, whether you're putting food for outside cats out and the raccoons get used to it and associate you with food, therefore associate other people with good stuff, they're not as afraid of us as they used to be. And they also know that when they see us, they might find a cozy hole in your attic, they might find a safe place under your shed, and that food association. So it's always good to be aware of signs of a sick animal or sign of how a healthy animal should be looking. The great news is we do have rabies vaccine programs in Allegheny County, and also it's much more common for people to have their pets vaccinated, which is an extra step to keep them safe too. One of the things that people ask me about most as far as conflicts goes are raccoons getting into trash cans. And I recommend first and foremost a trash can with a lid that fits on tightly. Open top trash cans are just welcoming. And once an animal, whether it's a raccoon or an opossum or a fox, gets into your trash, they're going to remember that as a place that they can find a buffet. So you can put a heavy rock or a brick on top of the lid of your trash can. I strap mine down with like elastic ties, double bagging your trash. I don't know if there are areas where you're actually allowed to just loosely throw trash into the can without a liner, but I see it all the time in litter. That's something that draws animals out. So making sure that the raccoons have less of a chance of smelling it, compounded with making it a little more difficult for them to get that meal, is sometimes enough to have them not get there in the first place. Wildlife, they think of the amount of energy. It's food for them is a cost benefit analysis. So the more effort a raccoon has to use into getting into your trash can, it's more likely to lose interest and move on to somewhere else. Additionally, one of the things that I found most effective for deterring raccoons, if you already have them around, they have an excellent sense of smell, and a way that you can harmlessly use that to your advantage is putting a lot of black pepper or cayenne pepper around your trash can, even just a circle around it. Once that hits their nose, a lot of them, that's enough. They want to move on to find food elsewhere. So raccoons by nature are primarily nocturnal. That still rings true even if we're seeing them more often during the day when they're habituated to our landscape. They are less active in the cold months, even though they don't truly hibernate. They slow their metabolism down. They sleep a lot more in a state of torpor is what it's called. And in the spring, they are giving birth to kits, 2 to 5 of them at a time typically, and the kits will stay with their mother. The father isn't normally in the picture, but the mom is very devoted, and the kits will stay with them. At about 8 months, they can sort of fend for themselves, but oftentimes they'll stay around mom nearby through the winter or until she has her next litter of kits the following year. They live in open cavities, so it could be a tree hollow, it could be under a deck, it could be chimneys. These are all great reminders to, especially before animals are giving birth in the spring. You know, once it's warm enough, just do a walk around in your yard. If you see openings, it's good to patch them up ahead of time. You know, you've probably heard an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That definitely rings true with animals, because when we're trying to evict them, sometimes laws actually prevent it, like with bats. once bats start giving birth to babies, you are stuck with them in your house. You cannot have somebody legally remove them because the babies are in a protected colony. And then with other animals, removing them, it's not a pretty story. Oftentimes the animals are euthanized, so getting them blocked out before they come in, 100% my recommendation. Why do we need raccoons in our neighborhood? If they're just ripping apart our trash, they do a lot more than that. They are nature's garbage man, which is kind of gross to us, but they will eat a lot of the dead animals that expire in places around our neighborhoods. So they are removing different bacteria and germs from our environment that could make your dog sick, that could make other animals in the area sick. And it also, you know, a little more appealing for us when we're going on a walk and we don't have a bunch of animal carcasses laying around. When a raccoon does vacate its nest after its babies are old enough, they will open up homes for other animals too, which is another way that they coexist with their fellow animal species. Coyotes are not something that everybody encounters frequently, but they are of major concern in Pennsylvania, whether you live in a crowded suburb or a more rural area where people have been used to them for decades. They have been around. They've been around since the 1920s. They're not a native species in Pennsylvania, but they're naturalized, which means they're here to stay and they are everywhere. Another animal that appears prominently in Native American folklore. There are actually two ways that you may hear coyote mentioned. I would like to recommend this book just so I do not forget it later. Checked out, somebody swooped it up today. But Coyote America, this is an excellent book, and I got a pretty cool occasion in coyote, capital C, as a deity or a godlike figure that represented human qualities that we would aspire to live up to. So coyote, oftentimes in these stories, was a trickster. Sometimes got into trouble, not really representing fully good or bad, but more so a figure that learned from their mistakes, that grew and developed. And by the end of the story, hopefully Coyote came out a better being for whatever trials and tribulations they went through, which again, just like the deer, they're things that I think everybody could learn a little bit from. And then also Coyote, lowercase c, the animal was very interwoven into Native American life, living alongside, you know, people for, you know, a very long history in America. I think the perseverance that coyotes show as being some of the last beacons of a Western landscape in America is something that some people would see as stubborn. We really, as a whole, don't like animals that don't fit neatly under our control. And coyotes, while some people think they're stubborn and they're from a bygone era, I think it's really admirable that they are as resilient and thrive in the face of our eradication efforts. Speaking of eradication efforts, coyotes have this really cool adaptation that humans have not really latched onto yet, or at least humans who would like to eradicate coyotes. We, in our brains, our human brains, we lump animals together that are very similar. Coyotes often spark our images of wolves. We did a pretty decent job eradicating wolves from most of North America. We think of their packs as being very similar, but they're two very different species with very different family structures. So in a wolf pack, everybody has a very specific role and they stay in that rigid role. If you would, you know, if there would be an eradication effort where we go out and we kill a couple wolves in a wolf pack, you splinter that pack and they can't work as a team to hunt anymore. So you may have effectively wiped out that wolf pack by taking out a few members who had key roles. Coyotes are very different because they usually live in a family of the alpha parents, yearling kind of babysitter role offspring, and then the new pups. They're very closely related family. Only the parents are going to be breeding. when hunters go in and try to eradicate coyotes, thinking we can take out a few in that pack, they'll splinter up and die. No, they'll splinter up and they'll all find new breeding partners. So it's kind of like a hydra. If we cut the head off, two more are going to grow out, which I'm kind of team go coyotes. It's, I think, a really telling example of how, you know, sometimes when we are trying to control animals or change their population or change their way of living, we act with just this, you know, kill it mentality. Science shows that is not effective. Science shows that we can live alongside these animals, learning about them. So I think that's a cool fact that gives me hope for them. When are the coyotes active? Even if you haven't seen them, they're most likely living in your neighborhood. And if a coyote was in your neighborhood and let's say unfortunately got hit by a car tomorrow, next week you would probably notice a lot more rats and mice. So they are undercover doing some dirty work to help us with pest control. Coyotes are primarily following their natural prey. So crepuscular times, dusk and dawn, just like the deer would be. But they also are smart enough to know to avoid us as much as they can. And that's why they're coming out in our cities at night to do some of that rat and mouse control that I mentioned. Their breeding season is typically going to be late winter, pups born in the spring, and the pups are going to be born in a den. Parents normally don't need to sleep in a den, they'll sleep out in the open, but the pups are more vulnerable. So they'll use any type of enclosure. It could be an uprooted tree that has an empty burrow underneath. It could be a log pile, brush pile, under a shed. Another great reason to kind of do that, walk around your property, make sure you don't have any openings. That could be very enticing to, you know, soon to be parents in the springtime. It's a family affair caring for all the pups. And at that time, when the pups are in the den, the parents are likely to be a little more defensive. People often talk about coyotes stalking them. And when they say stalking, it's typically a coyote watching them from afar, watching them and their dog from far away. But the coyotes don't normally actually approach them. If a coyote is ever watching you, like if you'd be walking over there and a coyote is watching you walking, what they're doing is they're forming kind of an invisible perimeter. They probably have pups behind them or a family member that they're protecting behind them. And they just want to make sure you see them. They're not making any efforts to conceal themselves. They're making efforts to be seen in hopes of intimidating you from coming any closer to their babies. Something that I love about them is, you know, while we have the bloodthirsty villain portrayals on social media, coyotes actually eat a ton of fruits and berries, and they also, like the deer, will help disperse those seeds and improve the biodiversity of berry bushes in a forest. As a top predator, they are kind of our last line of defense in controlling the populations of smaller prey species. We really don't have any bigger predators, you know, than the coyote now left in Pennsylvania. So we really need them or we would be overrun with anything below the food web. And those animals would be left at a lack of resources. There would not be enough vegetation for out of control populations of rabbits, rodents, deer. And the coyotes, when they are taking animals out of the population, they are not like human hunters going out for the biggest buck and pulling out the healthiest members of society because they're the nicest looking trophy. They're actually preying on the ones that are sick, that are actually hurting the gene pool. So when coyotes do take down prey, they're normally improving the overall health of that species gene pool. They, as I mentioned, love to eat rodents, and again, just, you know, kind of like the last bastion of the American West in my mind. And it's really cool to think of that animal having expanded its range over here. And when we think back to, you know, now it's very obvious to see the mistakes that we made with eradicating the American bison, for example. I think most people would say that was a mistake and we don't want to repeat it. We have an opportunity now to learn from our mistakes with this animal here. And I would encourage more people to advocate for them. Be awesome. These guys are adorable. They are our only native marsupials. So they have their little pouch that they keep their babies in. As young, they can use prehensile tails, but it's more of a myth with adults. They're a little bit too heavy to use that tail to hang on. But they do have cool curly tails, and the adults, while they can't support their body weight on it, they'll gather up leaves, and you might see them with a tail full of leaves, taking it to build a nest for their babies. And they do have a very low body temperature. For that reason, a lot of diseases like rabies will not be able to remain in their system. So they effectively are immune to not only a lot of the things that we might be afraid of catching, they also can withstand some venomous snake bites. So these guys are tough in a lot of ways. One way they're not tough is because they are marsupials. They haven't been built for our Pittsburgh winters. They are very susceptible to frostbite. They seem like with their little naked ears and their naked tails and their naked feet, they should be hibernating, but they are active, even if they're a little slower all winter, and a lot of them do end up with frostbite. A lot of them don't make it through winter, so it is hard for them. If you see an opossum, and give them a break. They have very, very rough lives for such cool animals. They too are the scavengers that are cleaning up the neighborhood. They do pest control. So they can go up trees. I mostly see them on the ground, and that's a lot of times because they have that playing dead fainting response. A lot of times when you actually see them out in the open, they're on the ground, but they can go up in the trees too. And when they do not dig holes. However, animals like groundhogs, we're going to talk about briefly how groundhogs, and I mentioned the raccoons, when they vacate a cavity that they've already lived in, an animal like an opossum would be very, very happy to find a shelter for winter because they just aren't ready for the frost. So yeah, they will go into a tree hollow, but more so potentially spend a couple nights there. They don't necessarily live there long term. And part of their pest control diet is they love eating ticks. So they, help keep our yards free of ticks, which benefits us, benefits our dogs. The eastern cottontail. A lot of these animals, you're going to see overlapping traits because a lot of the animals in our yards are herbivores, or they are filling prey species roles. These guys doing some of the same things you see deer on smaller scale. So they're helping disperse seeds, they're helping improve plant diversity. They also are a keystone species, which means they are a species that has an unusually high impact in their food web. So they are a main prey source for a high amount of animals. So a lot of different animals rely on them for food. And they also, because they are a keystone species, scientists can use them as indicators of the ecosystem's health. They can monitor rabbit populations year to year, and if they see a huge boom in rabbits, they might look into, okay, what's going on with the predators around here, and the other way around. If suddenly the rabbits, the population crashes, they might investigate why the rabbits are declining, and also the fact that with the decline in rabbits, that area can no longer support the predators that were relying on rabbits. So they're important for studying the overall health of an area. And something that people don't think about a lot is in eating all of our precious plants, they will actually help kind of make stronger root systems in specific vulnerable areas like grasslands and meadows. So they will, through root strengthening and preventing erosion, benefit the lands that they live on. When you do see rabbits, it is rough because they have a lot of babies. So it is not, unfortunately, like a checkout for them one time a year. They can have up to 5 litters, but
somebody could get babies.
It's hard to always be vigilant looking out for them, but it is something that when you know what you're looking for, you can usually spot a rabbit's nest and figure out ways to avoid it. They're having their babies basically spring through fall, and the mom leaves the babies unattended for most part of the day. So if you happen upon a nest, it's oftentimes your dog stumbled on it, or you maybe were going, hopefully checking before you mowed the lawn. The nests are, pieces of her soft fur and grasses that she collects, but just shallow holes in the ground. They're typically not tunnels. But these bowls will just have the rabbits, the baby rabbits, they're born blind, they're helpless, but within about 2 weeks, they are out on their own. They're not able to defend themselves, so their only protection at that point is just freeze when they see danger. But it is amazing to think of an animal that is born and out of the house at 2 weeks old. And it's even crazier than to think that the parents are ready to start all over again. I would recommend for anybody who has ever had a rabbit nest on their property, super easy way to monitor if mom is coming back, since she does come back so infrequently. If you want to make sure that the babies haven't been abandoned or something, want to make sure mom's coming back, nothing bad happened to her, I would recommend taking yarn. And you make a cross hatch over the nest, just very, very lightweight, cross, so it's very symmetrical. If mom comes back, you will see that those little pieces of yarn are moved and messed up. If you come back more than 24 hours later and that yarn is in the same position, it's maybe something happened to mom, and in that case, it is best to call an animal rehabber. But simple way to test before you accidentally kidnap some babies. Groundhogs. These guys, a lot of similarities to rabbits, but their burrow systems are more complex than most of the herbivores that you're going to see in your neighborhood. They have multiple chambers, which is really cool because what we don't see about them is all the magic going on underground. We don't give them enough credit because we don't see how intricate their lives are. They have very neat and orderly systems. They have a nursery chamber. They have an eating chamber, they have a bathroom chamber, they have all different rooms, and oftentimes other animals over winter will move in. And amazingly, unlike probably what would happen if somebody moved into your house, groundhogs are generally okay with it, and they just are peaceful neighbors, which is really cool because it can be anything from these snakes often move into their burrows and will just inhabit one of the rooms. Other animals like a possum is just trying to get out of the cold for a few days, might move into a spare bedroom. They also are preyed upon by a lot of animals, and whenever their burrows may open up, if they get preyed upon, they continue benefiting the food web by opening up spaces for other animals and helping that predator survive. And digging those tunnels, additionally, they are really cool excavators, but they also aerate soil. So I know people don't always want them in their lawn, but they will actually aerate the soil and help things going on below the surface of your yard. Snakes, not everybody's crazy about snakes, but they have a place. It's better to be educated about snakes, even if you don't want to go out and pick them up and give them a hug, because we can see how they're beneficial to the environment, respect their positions in the world, and also it might make you feel a little more comfortable because we really do not have a huge threat of snakes harming you. When you hear stories about people being bitten by a snake, the vast majority of the time, it is because somebody went and tried to kill a snake. If you see one from afar, you can just observe it and go your own way. We have snakes that do participate in symbiotic relationships with other species. There's a really cool example, not in Pennsylvania, but similar to them moving into groundhog burrows. There were some bird researchers that were watching owl boxes, owl nests, and they were noticing that the parent owls were bringing back live, very tiny snakes. And while they would bring back small food, other species, they would drop the other species right into their babies' mouths. The snakes, they would drop, and it almost seemed like a mistake, but then the snakes would be kind of like crawling around in the, sticks and stuff in the bottom of the nest. And they couldn't figure out why they were missing, eating these snakes. And after a while, they realized the mites and insects that transmitted disease were being eaten in the boxes with the snakes. And I can't explain, these animals know things that we can't even figure out how they could have that comprehension, how they would know that these owls, it's theorized, were using snakes almost like pests, or pest control pets that would cut down on small bugs that got into the nest that would harm their chicks. So they had a very close symbiotic relationship and would live there finding their own food and, coexisting. But we specifically in Pennsylvania have a couple snakes that you're likely to see. The rat snake, it is a larger snake. You will see the adults are mostly black, but they can have bands on them or spots on their back. They can climb trees, which is pretty unique. Also a little bit scary if you suddenly, or if you're walking in the woods and see a snake up here where you're not expecting it. But they're great as far as the rats and the mice around your house. There's a teeny tiny little snake called a Decay's brown snake. I love them. They like to live around garden areas and also cement. So they do like man-made areas. They're not necessarily just all in the dirt all the time. They like to go in the cement where they can warm up. And those guys will eat slugs and other pests in your garden. So they are a gardener's friend. And garter snakes, which a lot of people are familiar with, they kind of eat a little mix of very small rodents if they can, and some other bugs that we might not want around. So bird feeders are entirely, you could have 5 different programs about bird feeders, especially because the suggested health rules of bird feeders being maintained changes all the time. But I found this online when I was doing research, and I really loved the idea that somebody's suggestion was the only way to properly maintain a bird feeder without rats is to just go out and feed them out of your hands. That's about it. But I would say if you do want to have bird feeders, that is probably the one instance where I would say feeding wildlife is okay. We're not really acclimating these birds to us in the same way that people might be taming a deer to eat out of your hand, or risking being bitten by a raccoon or a fox. Bird feeding, I would just recommend you read up on it as far as maintaining the feeders. They can sometimes, where birds are congregating, transmit diseases, and hummingbird feeders especially, you want to be very up to date on maintaining and cleaning them. But overall, so we've been introduced to all these species. I think you probably would agree that we have now changed the landscape around us in ways that we can't really we can't reset factory settings now. We have altered it forever. So what do? How can we help out animals now that we're at the place that we're at? I think it is, and I am going to read this because this is not something I've memorized. It's in our best interest to embrace responsible stewardship and deepen our understanding of wildlife. We bear the responsibility to make informed choices that prioritize the well-being of both humans and wildlife, which hopefully your resource guide will help you do these things in easy, manageable ways that aren't too much effort for you guys too. Our goal should be peaceful coexistence while acknowledging that urban settings may not replicate the animal's original environment. Adapting to the challenges presented by urbanization requires a commitment to balance and sustainability, ensuring that choices today contribute to a resilient future. Going back to the idea of removing a specific animal from the environment, killing a specific animal that's causing trouble in our lives, in our backyards, that's not forward thinking. That's not a sustainable solution. We have to kind of think about why that animal was driven into the position, how we may have contributed to it. And those are the kind of forward thinking and sustainable commitments that will help you be able to enjoy your backyard to the fullest extent. And they also, we all, whether it's your neighbor who admires your garden, or your kids or your grandkids who you choose to teach them about the bird in your backyard, or they ask you what you're spraying on your plants, people are looking to you for setting the tone for how we interact with wildlife. So whether or not you think of yourself as influencing other people, you're directly affecting wildlife, and you're also setting the tone for other people around you. So what are simple ways to prevent a lot of the common conflict that we see? Fencing gardens. These are not catch-all solutions. So I don't want to mislead anybody into thinking these are things that are foolproof. But what I would say is, in my experience in talking to lots of people, incorporating as many of these different tactics as you can is going to provide you with the best chance of success. Additionally, you might have something that you might swear that Irish Spring soap scares away deer in your lawn 1 year. But the next year, the deer may either, let's say maybe there's less wild food for them the next year. They may be a little more inclined to, I don't like the smell of that Irish Spring, but I'm still gonna push through it because I'm really, really hungry and that tomato plant looks good. So animals are adaptable just like we are. Using a combination of the resource guide and some of these preventative measures is going to give you the best outcome. Fencing, netting cages around saplings prevents young plants from being nibbled on, and blocking access into the areas around your house that I mentioned, attics, chimneys, sheds, wood piles. A lot of people, have wood or brush piles at the edge of their yard that they don't really maintain. Those edges are where a lot of animals are kind of, seeking shelter. They have that advantage of hiding, so don't discount looking at those. Being a responsible pet owner, I take my cat outside. She's very, very old, so she's not running away anywhere, but she likes to go get some sun sometimes. So we'll sit outside together, but I wouldn't let her outside by herself. One, because she could be picked up by any animal, including a hawk. You hear about coyotes. Coyotes are not out to snatch your cats, but they don't know if a coyote would see a cat, in its territory. It does not know that that's your pet. It doesn't know that that's off limits in your mind. And part of being proactive is taking care of your pet, preventing those conflicts. Over 90% of wildlife conflict involving a pet is an off-leash dog. So that should be a clear indicator that a dog off leash, even if your dog is very well trained, it is still an animal that you may have pretty good recall in your home, but if it sees a squirrel, that dog is still a dog. So keeping your dog on leash is safest for your dog and for wildlife. Not acclimating wildlife through feeding them, getting them used to thinking that people are good, sources of meals. And also cleaning up trash and litter. Sometimes I don't know where this idea had become popular at some point. I see things like banana peels and orange peels on the road that people must have been eating like on their way to work or commuting. That is still trash. And not only is it trash and litter that you're throwing out of your car, it's food that has smells that attracts animals onto the roadway. Litter, it's litter in general, it's bad for animals. I love this quote. Because hopefully, as you go forward and enjoy animals this summer, you recognize these wild animals, they don't really need any defenses. They have the right to exist. They should be allowed to be here. They just need the people that are going to say, hey, they have that right. This was actually a bear that a friend had taken a picture of in the Carolinas, and it was right outside of his door. Just saw it that one time going by, never saw it again. It was just passing through. Now you easily could react. A lot of people would probably call 911 if they saw that, but it was just passing through. It probably just woke up for the spring and is looking, seeing what's new. And unfortunately, it probably woke up and some of the world around it was a little bit smaller because of their world being paved over at very unprecedented rates. So I hope that you keep in mind when you see wildlife, they're really adapting to our way of living all the time. A minor inconvenience on our part, if we escalate the situation, is a death sentence for some animals. What can we do? Some of that stuff is scary. Some of it seems like, a depressing uphill battle, but there are ways that we can help wildlife. Being familiar with their nest sites and with that animal's way of living, very helpful in just simply avoiding them, letting them live uninterfered with. Planting a pollinator garden. If you love gardening, get into planting native plants. And as far as maintaining your garden, maintaining your yard, please avoid, especially rodenticide is probably one of the most insidious things that is creeping up the food web. It will kill a mouse, but not before that mouse walks out into the open. It's easy prey for, anything from an owl to your cat or your dog. And it does not end there. that owl that dies is then going to be scavenged on by another, and it will travel up, even in California. If anybody had followed, there are some like pretty famous mountain lions that, have tracking collars, and, sometimes you'll see them on social media in the news. If they wind up in an urban area, in a lot of the situations the animals are in Pennsylvania, some of these mountain lions that are dying in part from mouse poison accumulating in their body. So you wouldn't think of something as big and strong as a mountain lion actually, being killed by that, but it builds up, it causes other diseases that make them weaker and weaker. And then that lends to conflict itself, because when that wild animal cannot survive going out and hunting down its actual food source, it will look for easy meals in neighborhoods. And that's when we have, issues with human lives. Again, bird feeders, just, be familiar with maintaining them safely. If you haven't had a bird feeder up and you're looking into putting one up, probably very carefully consider a platform or some type of catcher, because most bird feeders, if the birds are throwing seed down, that really does lead to, whether it's chipmunks or mice, coming to pick up the stuff that falls below. And speaking of birds, bird strikes, huge issue with populations hitting windows. That's typically the glass reflecting trees. And so all you need to do to help cut down on that is put something. It could be a decal on the window. You can hang up a picture on the window. It could even be frosted glass tape, so it doesn't have to be something colorful, but break up that reflection so the birds don't think they are flying towards trees. Just step outside and take a look as if you were a bird and see if your window is reflecting a tree line. And knowing when intervention is necessary prevents you accidentally kidnapping a baby animal or putting undue pressure on very struggling wildlife rescue services. So I do want to give you guys a couple resources. This is the only wildlife rescue that I'm familiar with that will actually come to the site of an animal. I've used them a few times, and it's a volunteer-run service. You call the number I have listed there. This is Wildlife in Need. That number will connect you to a dispatcher, and they get your location and they get a brief description of the animal. They will then call somebody in your local area who's more familiar with it, and that person will get some more information from you. I would recommend them because, one, you have almost like that consultation from a person in your area who's familiar with the species, but also all of the other rescues that I'm familiar with, you actually have to capture the animal and transport it yourself. Very helpful if you can do that, but sometimes you don't want to pick up, a raccoon or an opossum, something like that. So WIN is a very, very good resource to have. And they are stationed out of Meadville, but when they put you in touch with somebody local, they can help you that way. All right, so did you get that number if you need it? Thanks, yeah. All right, okay, so that's WIN. I am more local to the Verona Wildlife Center, which is affiliated with Humane Animal Rescue. It's just their wildlife branch. They're great in Verona, but you do have to bring animals to them. Did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that center in Verona is great. Wildlife Works in Youngwood is also very helpful, especially with birds. And the Game Commission, you can always call them for advice. I do want to stress something that some people are unfamiliar with, but going back to familiarizing yourself with when animals actually need help versus when they don't need help. If you call about a raccoon that you want removed from your property, they are not allowed to be removed and released elsewhere in Pennsylvania. So if you call about a raccoon that's not bothering you, doesn't look sick, it will probably, if somebody comes to pick it up, it will be euthanized. So I would go back to the default, thinking about what is an inconvenience for you. If that animal is just passing through, don't make it a bigger issue where the animal ends up dying. If it's just something that's, a neighbor passing through, maybe you see young animals that are oftentimes just looking, when they're first independent, imagine, you know, you move out as a teenager and your neighbor calls the cops on you right away. You don't need that in your life if you're just passing through looking for new territory to settle in. So these are all great resources to have, but knowing when to use them is really key.
Oh, yeah.
I think this speaks for itself. Coexisting, it's something we don't talk a lot about, but the need for environmental education and advocate for these animals. I'm very thankful to the library here. You guys have a beautiful green community, so especially in these green communities, it's very important to exercise compassion. Urban wildlife does deserve our respect as they're navigating the world that we have created. We've altered it a lot. They have an innate right to be free and unbothered by us. The key to coexisting harmoniously with urban wildlife lies in understanding their ways of living. By allowing wildlife to navigate life independently without desensitizing them, getting them used to human contact, we contribute to the balance of that ecosystem, which then, as a result, is healthier, more sustainable environment, both for animals and for us. Everybody sharing the neighborhood. Here's my contact information. Like I said, you'll get a resource guide, but if you have any further questions, you can feel free to send me an email. And I always want to plug the Master Naturalist program because it is, I think, one of like the coolest experiences as an adult, if you would like to kind of sharpen your skills in the natural world. It is a great group of people.